Major Douglas Kelley. He is the Army psychiatrist tasked with discovering whether these men are fit for trial.
The most dangerous conclusion at the Nuremberg trials didn't come from a judge or a prosecutor. It came from a psychiatrist sitting across from Hermann Göring, watching him think. Psychiatrist Douglas Kelley was tasked with determining whether the most powerful surviving Nazi leader was mentally fit to stand trial. What he found unsettled nearly everyone who read it. According to Kelley, the man responsible for staggering crimes functioned with clarity, confidence, and purpose.
This kind of very dark, Machiavellian, manipulative, vindictive person.
The real Goering was not what people expected after the war, and if that assessment was correct, it raised a far more uncomfortable question. One that still hasn't gone away, because if Goering wasn't mad, then what does that make him? The assignment nobody wanted. Douglas Kelley did not walk into Hermann Göring's cell expecting cooperation. He was there to evaluate competence, nothing more. The job was narrow by design, determine whether Göring understood right from wrong and could participate in his own defense during the Nuremberg trials. That should have been routine. It wasn't. From their first sustained encounters, Kelley noted something that immediately complicated the assignment. Göring was alert, engaged, and commanding the interaction. He spoke deliberately. He followed lines of reasoning. He anticipated objections. There was no confusion about where he was or why he was there. For a man facing execution, he displayed control that unsettled the observers around him. This mattered because the entire premise of the trials depended on mental responsibility. If Göring could be framed as unstable or psychotic, the moral architecture of the proceedings weakened. Kelley understood that pressure, and he resisted it. Psychiatrist Douglas Kelley subjected Göring to intelligence testing, structured interviews, and sustained observation. The results did not align with the image many expected. Göring scored an IQ of 138, well above average. His thinking was flexible. His memory was intact. His emotional responses were selective, not chaotic. Kelley found no evidence of hallucinations, no thought disorder, and no loss of reality testing. What emerged instead was a personality that revolved around dominance. Göring did not plead. He performed. He spoke about himself constantly, framing every event through his own central role. Kelley observed this pattern repeatedly, and noted how often Göring redirected questions back toward his achievements, his judgment, and his historical significance. This wasn't disorganization, it was structure. During the Nuremberg trials preparation period, Göring quickly positioned himself as the informal leader among the prisoners. Other defendants deferred to him. Guards noticed it, interrogators noticed it, Kelley noticed it. Göring projected certainty at a moment when uncertainty should have been overwhelming. That projection forced Kelley into an early conclusion, one that he did not yet fully articulate, but could not ignore. Göring did not present as a man detached from reality. He presented as someone intensely invested in controlling how reality recorded him. And that created a problem, because if Göring was mentally intact, then responsibility could not be displaced onto illness. Kelley understood the implication immediately. To diagnose madness would be easier. To deny it meant accepting something far less comfortable. But Göring wasn't just another prisoner in that facility. His position among the defendants made Kelley's assessment exponentially more significant, and what that meant for the entire trial was about to become impossible to ignore. Why this one defendant changed everything. Among the men held for the Nuremberg trials, Hermann Göring occupied a category of his own. This wasn't about rank alone, it was about gravity. Göring had been Hitler's designated successor, the public face of the regime at its most confident, and the defendant most capable of turning the courtroom into a performance. Everyone knew it. The prosecutors knew it. The guards knew it. And psychiatrist Douglas Kelley knew it from the moment Göring entered custody. That reality reshaped Kelley's assignment. Evaluating competence is one thing. Evaluating it in the man who could influence the entire trial is something else. Göring wasn't just another prisoner awaiting judgment. He was a strategic variable. His mental state could affect proceedings far beyond his own testimony. During the early phase of detention, Göring quickly asserted dominance. He spoke fluent English. He joked with the guards. He corrected officials on protocol. Other defendants watched him closely, often deferring to his opinions. Kelley observed that Göring understood hierarchy instinctively and exploited it whenever possible. Even stripped of power, he behaved as if authority were something he could still generate. This mattered because Göring was not defensive, he was expansive. He talked, a lot, and not carelessly. He spoke with purpose, shaping narratives, testing reactions, and measuring responses. Kelley noted how Göring treated interviews less like examinations and more like negotiations. Every exchange carried an undertone of positioning, how he would be seen, how his role would be remembered. That made Göring uniquely dangerous in a legal setting. A defendant who collapses under pressure is manageable. A defendant who remains coherent, confident, and verbally agile can shift momentum. Prosecutors worried Göring could outmaneuver witnesses, confuse timelines, or recast responsibility. His mental fitness was not an abstract medical question, it was a tactical one. What also distinguished Göring was his awareness of the stakes. He did not deny the possibility of execution. He acknowledged it calmly, almost clinically, but he returned again and again to one idea: legacy. Kelley recorded Göring's repeated emphasis on how history would judge him, not the court. History. That fixation revealed priorities that extended far beyond survival. By this point, Kelley wasn't just assessing an individual, he was observing how power behaves when stripped of its usual tools. Göring had lost uniforms, commands, and weapons. What remained was personality, and that personality was about to collide with every psychological method designed to expose weakness, except Göring had already figured out he was being tested. The man who knew he was being tested. By the time Douglas Kelley began formal testing, it was clear that Hermann Göring was not approaching these sessions passively. This was not a man waiting to be analyzed. This was a man entering a contest. Kelley understood that psychological tools only work if the subject underestimates them. Göring did not. The testing environment was controlled and repetitive by design. Kelley used structured interviews, intelligence assessments, projective tests, and long stretches of direct observation. Each method was meant to reveal something different: cognition, impulse control, emotional processing, and self-perception. Göring treated each one as an opportunity to assert mastery. On intelligence testing, there were no surprises, except the absence of weakness. Göring performed comfortably above average, scoring an IQ of 138. He did not struggle with abstraction. He did not lose focus. He did not fatigue. Kelley noted how quickly Göring grasped the intent behind certain questions, often anticipating follow-ups before they were asked. This wasn't anxiety-driven performance. It was confidence rooted in ability. Projective testing was more revealing, but not in the way many expected. When shown Rorschach ink blots, Göring did not produce chaotic or disorganized responses. His answers were controlled, vivid, and often centered on dominance, violence, or self-reference. Kelley observed that Göring consistently interpreted ambiguous stimuli through frameworks that placed himself at the center of action. The world, as Göring described it, was something acted upon or conquered. What stood out was not extremity, but consistency. Across different tests and different days, Göring's responses aligned. There were no dramatic swings, no fragmentation, no loss of coherence. Kelley emphasized this point repeatedly in his notes. A man feigning stability eventually slips. Göring did not. Equally important was how Göring managed the interpersonal dynamic. Kelley noted that Göring frequently attempted to reverse roles, asking questions of the examiner, steering conversations, and subtly challenging authority. These weren't outbursts, they were calculated probes. Göring wanted to know who held leverage and how firmly. During extended interviews, Göring displayed stamina that surprised observers. He spoke at length without drifting. He returned to earlier points strategically, reinforcing themes about leadership, loyalty, and competence. Kelley noted that Göring framed himself not as a criminal reacting to defeat, but as an executive explaining decisions under pressure. The language was deliberate. The real Göring was not revealed in a single test result. It emerged in the pattern: a disciplined mind, a stable sense of self, a relentless focus on control. This placed Kelley in a difficult position. The tools designed to expose weakness instead confirmed structure. The more data Kelley gathered, the harder it became to argue that Göring's behavior was pathological rather than purposeful. But what made Göring even more dangerous wasn't just his intelligence or discipline. It was something harder to measure, something that worked on people without them even realizing it was happening. The weapon hidden in plain sight. What unsettled Douglas Kelley most wasn't anything Hermann Göring said under questioning, it was how easy he made the process feel. Göring appeared cooperative, even personable. He greeted Kelley warmly, he maintained eye contact, he listened. On the surface, this looked like compliance. Kelley quickly realized it was something else. Göring understood people. He adjusted his tone depending on who entered the room. With guards, he was affable. With officials, authoritative. With Kelley, analytical. Each interaction was calibrated. Kelley noted that Göring rarely challenged directly. Instead, he guided conversations where he wanted them to go, framing himself as reasonable, informed, and indispensable. This was charisma used as leverage. Göring did not demand control, he generated it. Even stripped of rank, he projected certainty. That projection mattered because it shaped how others responded. Kelley observed that prolonged exposure to Göring often softened resistance. People talked longer than they planned. They explained more than necessary. Göring created momentum, then let others carry it forward. The illusion of cooperation played a crucial role here. Göring appeared open, but he rarely conceded ground. When pressed, he redirected. When cornered, he broadened the frame. Kelley noted how Göring avoided defensive reactions that might signal guilt or panic. Instead, he maintained composure, even humor, as if the process itself was another arena he had prepared for. This created a subtle distortion. Observers unfamiliar with Göring's methods sometimes mistook engagement for honesty. Kelley did not. He understood that control does not require aggression. It requires predictability. Göring offered that predictability consistently. What also stood out was Göring's endurance. Despite being a large man in visibly poor health, long interviews did not exhaust him, and repetition did not frustrate him. Kelley noted that Göring seemed energized by sustained interaction, particularly when he sensed influence. This wasn't nervous energy, it was purposeful. Göring treated conversation as a tool, one he had refined over decades in political life. For Kelley, this raised a difficult question. If Göring's behavior could disarm professionals trained to detect manipulation, what did that say about the systems designed to confront him? The danger wasn't that Göring resisted evaluation, it was that he adapted to it seamlessly. But Kelley wasn't the only expert evaluating Göring during the Nuremberg trials. Another psychologist was drawing very different conclusions from the same man, and that disagreement was about to crack open a debate that went far beyond one prisoner's mental state. When two experts see different monsters. By the time Douglas Kelley had completed months of evaluations, it was no longer just Hermann Göring under scrutiny. Kelley himself was now part of the controversy. Inside the Nuremberg operation, a quiet divide had formed over a single question: what, exactly, did Göring represent? The split became most visible in the contrast between Kelley and fellow examiner Gustav Gilbert. Both men used similar tools. Both interviewed the same prisoners. Both observed the same behavior. And yet they arrived at sharply different conclusions. Gilbert leaned toward pathology. He described Göring as sadistic, aggressive, and psychologically deviant. Kelley did not dispute Göring's cruelty or ego, but he rejected the idea that these traits constituted mental illness. This disagreement wasn't academic. It went to the heart of responsibility. Kelley believed that labeling Göring as disordered created an escape route. If Göring were sick, then his actions could be reframed as symptoms. Kelley refused that framing. He saw something more dangerous, a man operating within the normal range of personality, using intelligence and ambition without internal brakes. Psychiatrist Douglas Kelley was explicit about this concern. In his notes and later writings, he argued that calling Göring insane would turn him into an anomaly, a monster separate from ordinary people. That separation, Kelley believed, was comforting, but false. Monsters don't require explanation. People do. This stance isolated Kelley. The public wanted reassurance that the architects of genocide were fundamentally different from everyone else. Gilbert's interpretation offered that comfort. Kelley's did not. The professional tension between the two men intensified as the trials approached. Gilbert accused Kelley of being too close to his subject. Others quietly wondered whether Göring's charisma had compromised Kelley's judgment. Kelley pushed back, insisting that distance alone did not produce accuracy, observation did. What made the divide sharper was that Göring himself seemed aware of it. Kelley noted instances where Göring subtly tested interpretations, leaning into traits that might be misread as instability, then pulling back into clarity. It was as if Göring understood how much hinged on how he was classified. Behind closed doors, prosecutors paid attention to this dispute. A finding of competence meant Göring would take the stand as a coherent, formidable defendant. A finding of disorder could blunt his influence. Kelley stood firm. The data, as he saw it, did not support a diagnosis. This chapter marked a turning point. No longer was the question whether Göring could stand trial. The question had become whether the world was prepared to accept what Kelley was circling toward, an interpretation that stripped away madness and left intention. And when Kelley finally stated that interpretation clearly, it changed everything about how Göring would be understood. The real Göring was... Douglas Kelley stopped circling the conclusion when the data left him nowhere else to go. After months of interviews, testing, observation, and comparison, his assessment of Hermann Göring hardened into something precise and deeply unsettling. Göring was not insane. He was not psychotic. He was not detached from reality. According to Kelley, he was mentally intact, intellectually capable, and fully responsible for what he had done. This was the moment Kelley understood the danger of his own findings. Douglas Kelley describes Hermann Göring's personality during the Nuremberg trials as highly intelligent, charismatic, and intensely narcissistic, but fundamentally normal in a clinical sense. Göring knew where he was. He knew why he was there. He understood the charges against him. He understood the moral framework being applied, and he rejected it anyway. Kelley noted that Göring's personality revolved around a powerful ego structure. Almost every response Göring gave, across multiple testing environments, redirected attention back to himself. Kelley identified this as extreme egocentricity, not delusion. Göring did not invent a reality, he simply placed himself at the center of it. Crucially, Kelley found no major mental illness that could explain away Göring's behavior. What Kelley saw instead was a disciplined workaholic, someone who had thrived on pressure, decision-making, and command. Göring approached the trial the same way he had approached power, as a system to be managed. The real Göring was not driven by madness, but by calculation. Kelley wrote that Göring displayed what he called a normal basic personality, layered with deep narcissism and ambition. It meant Göring could plan, adapt, and justify without losing internal coherence. His crimes were not impulsive, they were administrative. Göring evaluated outcomes, accepted costs, and moved forward. This conclusion directly challenged the idea that evil requires abnormal psychology. Kelley rejected the notion that Göring was a monster in the clinical sense. Monsters don't weigh consequences. Göring did. Monsters don't manage perception. Göring obsessed over it. Kelley's assessment carried an implicit warning. If Göring was mentally normal, then the capacity for his actions did not belong to a rare psychological category. It belonged to a personality type that could exist anywhere power and opportunity aligned. It offered no comfort. It offered no distance. The real Göring was a man who chose, and once that choice was acknowledged, there was no psychiatric diagnosis left to absorb the responsibility, only the verdict. But delivering that conclusion didn't free Kelley from its weight. In fact, what happened to him afterward suggests he carried that burden far longer than anyone anticipated. The psychiatrist who couldn't escape. The Nuremberg trials moved forward, but Douglas Kelley did not leave them unchanged. Once his assessment of Hermann Göring became clear, it stopped being a clinical conclusion and started becoming a personal burden. Kelley had answered the question he was assigned to answer. What followed was the weight of what that answer implied. Psychiatrist Douglas Kelley understood that by describing Hermann Göring's personality during the Nuremberg trials as mentally normal, he had removed the most comforting explanation available. Göring's actions could not be dismissed as the work of a deranged mind. Kelley had helped establish that Göring knew exactly what he was doing. That clarity carried consequences. Kelley's findings informed how prosecutors approached Göring, reinforcing the idea that he was a calculating, responsible actor rather than a man unraveling under pressure. But outside the courtroom, the response was colder. Kelley's interpretation did not match what many people needed to believe in the aftermath of the war. Public appetite leaned toward pathology. Gustave Gilbert framed the Nazi leadership as psychologically abnormal, and that interpretation gained more traction. It offered distance. It implied finality. Kelley's view did neither. His conclusions suggested continuity, that the traits he observed were not confined to one regime or one country. That idea followed him home. After leaving Nuremberg, Kelley wrote and lectured extensively, warning that people like Göring were not historical accidents. He argued that ambition, opportunism, and moral flexibility could exist inside ordinary personalities when circumstances allowed them to flourish. These warnings were often met with discomfort. The war was over. The public wanted closure, not vigilance. Professionally, Kelley struggled with that disconnect. His work was serious, documented, and defensible, but it was not embraced. His book did not achieve the influence he expected. His lectures reached audiences, but the message failed to embed itself culturally. Kelley had delivered an answer that few were prepared to carry forward. Privately, the toll became visible. Colleagues noted growing frustration. He drank more heavily. He became increasingly preoccupied with the implications of his own conclusions. The question he could not seem to escape was the one Nuremberg had forced into the open. If Goering was not insane, then how easily could similar personalities rise elsewhere? The irony was unavoidable. Kelley had gone to Nuremberg to define evil clearly enough to prevent its return. Instead, he concluded that evil did not announce itself through madness. It arrived through ambition, structure, and permission. By the time years had passed, Kelley was no longer haunted by Göring himself. He was haunted by what Goering represented. The trials had ended, the sentences were carried out, but the psychological lesson Kelley extracted from those cells did not fade. And when Göring's life ended in that cell the night before his execution, it only confirmed what Kelley had been saying all along, but not in the way most people understood. Responsibility, not madness. When Hermann Göring took his own life on the eve of his execution, the act closed the legal chapter, but not the psychological one. For Douglas Kelley, the suicide did not contradict his assessment, it reinforced it. Göring's final decision was controlled, deliberate, and consistent with the personality Kelley had documented months earlier. There was no breakdown, no collapse, no sudden loss of reality. It was, in Kelley's view, a final assertion of agency. Göring's death did not erase responsibility, it underlined it. He chose the manner of his end for the same reason he had shaped every interaction during captivity, to control how the story concluded. Kelley understood that impulse clearly. Göring refused the humiliation of the gallows and replaced it with an exit he could frame as defiance. In the years that followed, Kelley warned that the most dangerous mistake was to treat figures like Göring as psychological outliers. Doing so, he argued, allowed societies to externalize blame and disengage from warning signs closer to home. If Goering had been insane, the lesson would have ended with him. Because he wasn't, the lesson extended outward. Kelley's own life ended tragically, and historians have debated how much Nuremberg contributed to that outcome. What is clear is that he never retreated from what he had learned inside those prison cells. He did not romanticize Göring, he did not excuse him, and he did not simplify him. The real Göring was not a puzzle to be solved by diagnosis. He was an example of what happens when intelligence, ambition, and ego operate without restraint inside a system that rewards them. Kelley believed that recognizing this reality was essential, not to absolve, but to prevent repetition. The Nuremberg trials were designed to prove that law could confront atrocity. Kelley's role ensured something else. That responsibility would not be diluted by psychiatric mythology. Göring stood trial, not as a madman, but as a man who made choices. And that is where this story ultimately leaves you. Not with a monster safely locked in the past, but with a question that remains uncomfortably current. If Hermann Göring did not require madness to become what he became, how would you recognize the same personality traits before they're handed power again? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, we'll see you in the next video.